Hi, guys, and welcome to another TKC Live. I am Mary Beth Temple from Hooked for Life Publishing, and what we're going to look at today is two different variations on the knit stitch. We're going to look at the knitting through the back loop to make a twisted rib. And if you want to see the pattern that I'm working on, you can download that. I'm sure our friendly host has put a link in the chat. But it's the squishy, sweet and squishy baby hat. And so we're going to take a look at the TBL, which is knitting through the back loop. And then we're going to take a look at K1B, which is knitting one below. Now, both of those stitches are just variations on the regular knit stitch, and they give you a lot of texture, which we'll look at a little more closely. So let me switch my little cameras here so you can see my hands and get a little more light on the subject. And we're ready to go. Now, the reason that I'm using the knitting through the back loop instead of a regular ribbing, let's see, I'm going to get this as close as I can so you can see it, but I don't want it to get blurry. If you look at the knit stitches, instead of a traditional knit stitch, so each side of this loop, we call this a leg. And normally the legs of the stitches are next to each other. But if you knit through the back loop, they're crossed. So if you look closely right here at the stitches that we have going on, wait. Okay. Yes. If you look closely right here, you can see that the legs of the stitch are crossed. So when the stitches are crossed like that, two things happen. One is you get a little more visual interest. It's just a little bit more interesting to look at. And two, because the legs of the stitch have to travel a little farther, the yarn has to work a little harder, you get a tighter stitch. So sometimes you'll see Knit One TBL used where you really want that ribbing to sort of squish in. But for this hat, because it's a Knit One Purl 2 ribbing worked in the round, it's more for visual interest than anything else. But you can see that these knit columns really pop because of the way the stitches are twisted. So to work Knit One TBL, it's exactly what it sounds. We're going to knit one through the back loop. So whereas normally we would go right here and knit our stitch, we're going to go through the back loop, through the back leg and knit. And you can see exactly right there, those legs are already twisted. So I'm just going to do that for a little bit. I will say it's very funny. As much as I enjoy watching TV or listening to a podcast when I knit, I've also noticed when I work on a stitch with TBL in it, I have to really pay attention because if I go back on autopilot, I tend to knit the front leg, which is not what we wanted. So once again, normally I would knit right here, but instead I'm putting my needle right in the center of that stitch. I'm pushing it through to the back, so I'm knitting through the back loop or the back leg. And I'm knitting in the round. So for this pattern, if you're working on the pattern, oh, sorry, that should have been a purl. If you're working on the pattern for the baby hat, it has you working on circular needles for the larger sizes and DPNs for the crown decreases. And also if you're doing the newborn size, it's so small that you really need to start on DPNs instead of a circular. And once again, we will have a link to the pattern is in the chat. So I'm going to keep going here. That's all there is to TBL. It's a lot, sounds like it's a lot more work than it is. As always, you can always ask questions in the chat. Anna says hi from Tennessee. Hi, Anna. And Linda wants to know, can I do this with bulky yarn? Yeah, knitting in the back loop you can do with anything. Now for the baby hat, here's what's going to happen. If you knit with bulky yarn and the appropriate size of needles, it's going to be bigger. So what I would do is make the smallest size and assume that it would be child size. Because of course it's written for worsted, which is what I'm using. So I'm using Caron Yarns Cotton Cakes, just because a lot of times what happens when I'm finished with a project here on TKC, I will donate it because I have lots and lots of projects going at any given moment, both for my own work and for our friends here at TKC. Once again, just right through that back leg, back loop. And I hate to throw things out, so sometimes I'll go off camera and I'll finish the project and then I'll donate it to a local charity. So here is our ribbing with our Purl 2 and our twisted knit stitch with the legs crossed. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, I'm checking out my pattern here, is the knit one below stitch. So I'm going to have to put a round in. Now, it's going to tell you to switch to a larger needle, but if I'm 100% honest, I forgot to bring the larger needle with me on camera. So in the interest of not going to get it, I'm not going to I'm not going to change needles. So I'm just going to put a round on this now. And so for this round, now we're done knitting our stitches through the back loop. So why do you traditionally go from a smaller needle to a larger needle when you have ribbing, like for a brim or a wrist cuff or maybe the top of a sock? And that's because you tend to knit ribbing with a smaller than usual needle, because the whole point of ribbing when it's functional is that you want it to tighten up. You want it to gather around your head, around your wrist, around your calf, wherever you want that to pull in. So knitting it on a smaller needle does two things. One thing is it does make it fit you a little bit more tightly, a little more closely. And the other thing is, since ribbing has a job to do, working a little more densely, a little more tightly, will make it more durable. It will hold on to its elasticity longer because the stitches are a little tighter. But we were talking about the difference before. So for this round, I'm just knitting like I normally would. I'm not knitting through the back loop. So let's take just a closer look at this. This is what I mean by the legs are crossed. When I knit through the back loop, the stitch twisted and one leg is over the other leg. When I knitted like I would normally knit, look how much space there is between those legs if I spread it out a little bit. So there's no twist in there. So that's the difference between knitting the way you normally would and knitting through the back loop. And again, I'm just putting this setup round on here so we can work on the knit one below. Knit one below is another knit stitch variation. It's not very complicated. It's not very hard to learn, but it's certainly easier to do if you can see it rather than reading about it in a book. Isn't video grand? As always, if you have more questions, if you go ahead and ask them in the chat, then our friendly host will make sure that I see them and answer them. And other than that, this is we're having a very chill knitting day today. We're just going to finish this round and work on the next one. Let's see. Oh, we're getting closer. So I started to say I was using, this yarn is Caron Cotton Cakes, and it was closest to my workstation because I just did some chemo caps to donate, and I really like the Cotton Cakes yarn for chemo caps because it is a cotton acrylic blend. So the cotton makes it really soft and the blend makes it easy to care for. Sometimes, as you know, if you knit a lot, sometimes cotton yarns will kind of stretch out a little bit. They don't snap back like maybe a wool would. So I like the cotton acrylic blend. It helps the hats hold their shape even though they get the softness from the cotton. So again, a lot of times when I'm getting ready to spend some time with you guys, I will look and see what's closest to my workstation, and then that's what we're going to use. Almost there. Let's see, we've either got 1 or 2 repeats left. If I was a good person, I'd have put a stitch marker on there. But, you know the expression, do as I say, not as I do? You should probably always use a stitch marker to note the beginning of the round, but I cheated because on this pattern, first off, I can see where that round is starting because my tail's hanging right there, and I know I had a 3-stitch repeat, so it's very easy for me to see the beginning of the round without having put a marker in. So we're now looking at round 2 of the hat body. And for every knit stitch, we're going to knit 1 below. So as we proceed, again, if you're following along with the pattern, the knit stitches will remain in a column. So if you see the 2 purl stitches, you're always going to purl them. So let's see. Let's make sure that I have it where you can see it. This would be my regular knit stitch. This would be the knitting through the back loop that we already went over. So for a knit 1 below, instead of knitting in the stitch that presents itself to me, I'm going to knit in the one below it. So you can see I'm giving my work a little tug side to side so I can really see where that gap is. I'm sticking my needle right in that hole. And if you look right here, there's 2 strands over my right hand needle. I'm going to finish my stitch and pull it through and push everything off at once. And now purl 2. Knit 1 below. So go into the center opening of the stitch below the one on your left hand needle, and you're going to pop everything off at once. Purl 2. Knit 1 below. And once again, let's see what kind of a close look we can take at this. You can see that you have 2 strands that are over your right hand needle. So this doesn't look like too much of a pattern right now because we just have the 1 row or the 1 round on. But what it does, if you look at the photograph of the pattern that we shared when you decided to join us today, or the photograph that's on the pattern, you can see those knit 1 belows make exaggeratedly large stitches. So again, it does a couple of things. It gives you some visual interest, and it gives you a very dense fabric, which is great for things like hats because it traps the heat. As you know, thicker fabric gives you a little more air, a little more heated air in there to keep your head warm. But also mostly it looks cute. So it's a really soft, dense fabric. Now, if you want to move on in your knitting exploration and learn things like the fisherman rib stitch or the beehive stitch, these are also stitches that use the knit 1 below technique. So again, if these are stitches you want to explore and try out, you'll already be familiar with the concept. So if you're carrying on and making the hat, you're going to alternate these 2 rounds. You're going to have 1 round where you just knit 1, purl 2, and then you're going to have 1 round where it's knit 1 below, purl 2. And you're going to alternate those 2 rounds until the hat measures the height that it tells you in the pattern, and then you will do some clever decreases and finish it off. So again, this is a great donation hat. This is a great hat for oh heck, I have to go to a baby shower. I have to go to a little kid's birthday party, and I don't have anything adorable to give them. It's nice in a yarn that changes colors, like a self-striping yarn. That can be really cute. So once again, I'm still knitting one below. I'm going below the next stitch. And knit one below. Now let me take a look. Oh, I still haven't gotten to the end of my round. Okay, if we have any more questions, now is a really good time to ask. Just because I feel like we have done what we set out to do. We learned our twisted rib and our knit one below. All right. So what happens when you do what I just did, and I put a knit one below and a stitch where it doesn't belong? Let's show how to fix this. So I wasn't paying attention. See, I should have had a stitch marker. That's what I get for being a smart aleck. I put a knit one below stitch here, and it should have been a regular knit one. So how do I save this? Because if I just pop that stitch out, it's going to unravel. What I'm going to do is insert my left-hand needle tip in there where the mistake stitch happened and pop out the mistaken stitch. Now the next thing I need to do is grab the top ones of these loops. Let me see if I can show you that again. So what happened after I popped here, let's make the mistake again. So if I knit one below in the stitch that did not need a knit one below, and I went, oh crud balls, that is not what I wanted to happen. I'm going to take my left hand needle tip and put it in where the mistaken stitch is and pop that mistaken stitch out. So now I hope you can see right here. So I have 3 strands, 1, 2, 3, and I want to save this one. I want to save the leftmost strand. And how you can tell it's the right one, and this is really fiddly, but you can see if you travel with that yarn that it's connected to the stitch over here, the stitch that you worked in. You want to save what was the working yarn. You don't want these guys because these were attached to the ones below. So I'm going to slide it here and I'm going to pop these 2 guys off. And now I have saved my stitch. So for this round, we're going to just knit 1, purl 2, knit 1, purl 2. We're not going to do anything fancy. See how big that stitch is though? You can see that's where the knit one below was before because the stitch looks very large. 2, and we're going to do this all the way around, and then our next round would be knit 1 below, purl 2. So the nice thing about this pattern is you don't have to guess where the knit stitches are going to be because they stay in a column. You're not going to have to guess where the purl stitches go because they stay in a column. So it's very intuitive. The tricky bit is trying to remember if you have to set your work down if you were on a knit row or a knit one below row. But again, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. Because the stitch is so big, I know that my last stitch there was a knit one below, and I can also see that there are 2 strands wrapped around the throat of that stitch. So I know this is a knit stitch. When I'm looking at a knit stitch, there's only 1 strand wrapped around the throat of my knitting needle. And so then I would know that was a knit one below row. And again, if you make a mistake like I did earlier, now you know how to fix it. All right, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I want to go back to the beginning of the rounds just so I can put another couple of knit one belows on there so you can see what I mean about the stitch pattern. Cindy has a great question. What is the difference between this and a slipped stitch? A slip stitch, you are not, let me try and articulate this well. If you are slipping a stitch, you're moving it from the left-hand needle to the right-hand needle, and you are not manipulating it in any way. You're not doing anything to it. For the knit one below, you are in fact working into the stitch. So you are doing something with it. So it's not an instance where you're just moving it from one needle to the other. So that was a really good question. Because something goes in the knit one below stitch, nothing goes in the slipped stitch. For that reason, because the stitch tends to elongate, one of the things I did some, if you want to go back and look at some of the other TKC lives, we've done some on slip stitching. And one of the things that I talk about in slip stitching is that you have to be careful because you lose a lot of height in the stitch because you're not doing anything to it. And one of the things with the knit one below stitch is you do not lose that height because you are in fact manipulating the stitch. So I've cheated my way back to the beginning of the round because I just want to put a little bit, I want to just put one more row, a few more iterations of knit one below in there so you can see again. So I'm back at the beginning of my round. I did my knit one, purl two all the way around. I'm going to insert my my knitting needle way down there and do my knit one below. And pop that off and purl two, knit one below, purl two. I'm just going to do that one more time. Knit one below, purl two. So let's take a look at the resulting fabric. And again, even though I forgot to go up the knitting needle size, remember that I didn't have my bigger knitting needles with me. Look at this. Here's my twisted stitch. Now this is all the same yarn on the same size needle, and look at the difference. There's my twisted stitch. You can see how tight that is. There's my regular knit stitch. You can see that that's a little bigger. And now up here, here's my knit one below, and that is bigger still. So what it does is it takes that knit column and it spreads it out a little bit and just gives you a really super interesting fabric. So I hope you had a good time learning the knitting through the back loop and the knitting one below. And if we don't have any more questions, hey, actually I keep forgetting I have 2 cameras now, y'all. This is quite the new setup for me. Let's get the lights out of the way so you don't go blind. So once again, I am Mary Beth Temple from Hooked for Life Publishing. I'm here with my good friends at the Knitting Circle. I thank you so much for joining me. Remember, you can grab that free download from the link in the chat, and we'll see you again really soon. Okay? Bye-bye.